Well, welcome back to another episode. This time it's the Porsche Panamera. A lot to cover on this car, a lot of really interesting facets, but fortunately for me, I can say that there is a 970 generation, a 971 generation, and then a 976 generation. So unlike some manufacturers that like to do lots of complex codes for different names and different generations, they try to keep it fairly simple, which helps me out. So we're going to start off at the 970 generation, but a couple of things I want to cover first. So the first one is the Aston Martin Rapide was sort of also taking on this idea of just sort of stretching the sports tourer or sports car that you had. And other manufacturers had sort of set in this way of selling, and I mean actually selling, because if we think of BMW M5, for example, that's kind of stalwart. That's the one that people think of fast saloon. You've then got the Audi RS range and the Mercedes AMG range. But really, that sort of fast saloon market, it's been a bit in and out with only a few cars really representing it. And Porsche saw the gap and they said, well, we've got people out there, they like the Cayenne, they like our sports cars, but there's some people that really want to sort of draw the two in, family car and sports car, and for whatever reason they don't want to buy both, which would have been the best idea for Porsche if someone could just walk in, buy a 911 and a Cayenne. But there was a market that they knew they were missing out on, and so the 970 arrives. Now, if you're looking for a used first generation car, there's going to be a few different variations for you to look at, but let's talk about the base models first, because these are going to be the cheapest but also in many ways the riskiest. Okay, so 970 generation, let's start here. For the 970, you start with a 3.6 V6 engine, naturally aspirated petrol engine. You've got a 3 litre V6 diesel engine. Okay, we'll talk about these two first, and then we'll move over to the 3 litre V6, which can come in a hybrid form. If you're looking at a V6 3.6, it is going to be a step away from what you may think the brand represents power-wise. Okay, that's not me being harsh about the 3.6. I mean, the engine itself has 295 horsepower, something like that. So it's not a slow car. Okay. None of these cars are slow. Even the diesel variant, I made a quick note, 245 brake horsepower. Okay, so first generation, if you want something budget, I'd go 3.6 V6, and that is because that engine is sort of lifted out of the Audi range, really. And so if you're thinking, well, I'd like to have a Panamera, the used prices are really good, but think about maintenance and how I'm going to insure it and everything else. 3.6 V6, you'll probably find really good dealer support behind it, or really good specialist support behind it. Also, being the least powerful, except for the diesel, put that over there for a second, it's probably going to be the most insurance friendly, especially if you've never owned a car like this before. This probably is the car for you, because 300 horsepower will feel perfectly acceptable on the road, even in a slightly heavier car like this one. And in all honesty, if you're someone that really likes to drive your car, and I mean you like to push it to the limits, you're not someone who just likes to ride a wave of torque, this is actually kind of the driver's one. It's funny this. You find this in a lot of Porsche products. The one that's the least power at the bottom of the range is in many ways the enticing one for those drivers who really want to get on the road and drive. Okay, so that's the 3.6 V6. Now let's go over to the diesel one. I know not all of you got the diesel one, but here, this is probably one of the best competitors for the diesel cars of the time, saloon form, that there is. So it's got the V6, which is kind of ubiquitous across VW's range. It's in the Touareg, it's in the Cayenne, it's in the Q7. I think they put it in the Q5 as well. Macan never gets it. Yeah, so a few other vehicles as well. Goes in sort of a lot of the larger Audi saloons as well. Good, robust engine. Does have a few bits there. You can check the buyer's guide out for this one if you want to know sort of lots about reliability-wise. But the interesting thing is that for the first time in anyone's life, they were looking at, say, BMW 3 litre diesel, so say the 530 diesel at the time, maybe even the 535D. They were looking at the Mercedes, say 320 CDI. Maybe they were looking, if you had it, there was a 420 CDI. And then from Audi, you're looking at 3 litre V6 model, similar engine to this. You may be looking at, they did a 4 litre V8 diesel, but I don't think that goes in the A6. I think that's just for the 8.8. So moves the market around a bit. And then Porsche come in and they say, well, we'll offer you a diesel engine. So you've got huge fuel economy, good power, 250 horsepower, but tons of torque behind that. I'd actually say if you put that and a V6 next to each other, even though there is a V6 advantage for horsepower, you'd probably see, say you do a rolling start from around 15 miles an hour, probably see the diesel just hold on to the petrol one. Okay, at real sort of top end of the speed, over say 120 miles an hour, 150 kilometers an hour, you might even see the diesel start to break away just a little bit. So gives you an idea. This was not a slow car, and it wasn't the brand sort of saying, well, we have to sell a diesel. This was clearly a choice by them. They did a little bit of reworking to the engine too, so it's not a wholesale takeover of the sort of Audi VW engine and just plonk it in a Porsche. They do have their own tune to it, put it that way, along with a few other bits to make it work. Is it the one to buy today? You know, earliest ones will be 14, 15 years old. If they've been taken care of, the thing you'll run into is, like most cars that are diesel of that age, replacing emissions equipment will probably be sort of a necessity. If it's not already been changed, you'll probably have to do it. Don't remove it. The engine's not designed to run without it. You can get it remapped and all these other things, but most countries now, so loads of countries that aren't, but they're not probably the countries that most of you are watching in, most countries are really getting strict on you removing different emissions equipment controls, especially for diesel engines. So you've got to be a little bit careful, and I wouldn't bother doing it. But I would just go about replacing them. The little tip I'll give you here, always check whenever you're buying something like this, and the Cayenne, if they have an engine in them that you know is a shared engine with the Volkswagen Group or Audi, you can go on parts catalogues online and you can do a cross match. Okay, and that cross match will tell you, did Volkswagen make the part, or is it just a Porsche part? Because there are a lot of parts that are actually just Porsche parts because they decided to, make their own version of things, which is great, and also you'll get a ton of support on that long term. However, you can find that the Volkswagen one is actually cheaper. Okay, little tip there, especially for things like emissions equipment, unless it had to be shaped to the bodywork, which I don't think the Panamera needed an adjustment to the DPF or the catalytic converter to fit. Could be wrong, but if it didn't, you may just find that there's a Volkswagen part and possibly a company that's making a either performance version of that, which is still legal, or just a copy part, and that could be, say, like 50% or 30% of the price. Now, for most of you watching this video, what you probably want is something that you can get 4 people in, or maybe kids and 2 adults, or whatever the makeup is of your life. Something that will still feel powerful, and when you want to get an overtake done, you don't have to think about it. It will do it. And thirdly, something that is relatively efficient to run. I'd say go and get a turbo, but at the end of the day, you've got to then pay turbo bills, and we'll come on to that in a second. So this is where the diesel really starts to sort of, if you were scoring something and something just wins a little bit, it wins 0.1 there, 0.1 here, and at the end of it, when you tally it all up, all those little 0.1s, those 0.2s, those little edges that it's done better, actually give it a higher total score. I think that's what you get with the Panamera diesel. It probably just edges out the V6. For me, I would probably look at the V6 petrol, the 3.6. Personal preference. It's the way I've always been. But if I found a really good condition diesel one, I wouldn't walk away from it because it's diesel. However, I should say, early cars, they're not emissions friendly for a lot of European cities. So you will probably have to pay either higher parking charges, congestion zone charges, or some of the other fees, or you may be banned entirely. That's for a lot of European countries. US, I don't think you have that issue, but you can let me know if you do. Obviously, 2015, these are still being made. 2015 onwards, you should find that they are eligible for Euro 6 emissions, and Euro 6 is usually the cutoff for then being able to take them in cities and things like that. So it's just something to bear in mind if you're looking at these. If you're never going to go around those areas, if you're watching in the UK and you think, I don't go to London. Well, it's Birmingham, it's Glasgow, it's Bristol, so there's a lot more to it. I'd check your local area. Because the last thing you want to do is having got excited about your new, Panamera to you, and you've taken it out, given it a wash, and you're really excited about it, and then you find out that the city that's closest to you, where you'd like to go and take your partner or your friend out for the evening, is going to be a charge to go into, or you can't go in at all. That would be a bit of a downer. So let's move on to the 3-litre engine in this generation, and this is named the Panamera S Hybrid, 350-ish, or sorry, 375 brake horsepower combined. Okay, it's a combined power output. Now you've got, it's a really interesting setup actually. It's a supercharged V6 engine with a plug-in hybrid system. Range on it isn't that high. I did try and make a note, but I'm not going to find it quickly. But it's an odd mix, I would say, to put together, because finding, I think I've mentioned this before, like you don't really find diesel hybrid engines. You do find petrol hybrid engines, and then you find turbo petrol hybrid engines. Supercharged engines have kind of disappeared anyway, for a lot of Europe anyway. Some big V8s in the US, you still get superchargers, and lucky you. But you don't really see the idea of a supercharged hybrid. I think the only one I can actually think of off the top of my head is the XC90 has a turbo and supercharged T8 engine between like 2016 to 2020. So then you do have sort of hybrid and supercharging and turbocharging. But one of the few exceptions actually that I can think of. So just an interesting point out there. Now, this will drag away a lot of potential diesel buyers. Okay, you've got over 100 horsepower more combined, so that's a huge factor. Okay, that is the difference, I'd say, between the 50 horsepower difference between the 3.6 V6 and the diesel's 250 horsepower. Once you're going, it's probably more noticeable if you're doing 0 to 60 sprints. But once you're on the road, the torque of the diesel engine kind of makes up for it. And bearing in mind that really the only measure that anyone should really ever care about is torque, because that is how power is being transmitted. Brake horsepower, then a measurement of revolutions for that. I won't go too far into it. I always make these videos way too long anyway. But the point being here that if you are pushing if you're pushing those two earlier engines, you will notice the 50 horsepower at points, but it's not really going to be sort of a critical difference. But 120 odd horsepower difference from diesel to hybrid, or 75 horsepower for the V6 to the hybrid, that's noticeable. And the way it's delivered is noticeable as well. This would probably be, if you can find one that's got a good battery. Fortunately, Porsche are one of the brands that, so far, it's clear they did their testing. Okay, because these will be old as 14 years old, and I don't hear like a ton of, oh, the battery pack failed. You just don't get a lot of that. What you do get is some degradation and preference of people saying this is quite a complex engine. So if something does go wrong, you may have saved some fuel in owning it, and you're not going to have to worry about any diesel legislation in the future. But there is some complexities to it. It's a supercharged engine to start with, okay? It's got one or two, I think this is the SQ5 engine actually, and the S5 engine from Audi. It's EA 837, something like that, 839? No, 389. It doesn't matter. I'll put a thing somewhere around here, and then you can see which engine it is. The point being, it's just, there's a lot of complexity going on here. And where we're about to go on to, this is kind of the middle ground. So I've covered the base ones. You've got base diesel, the diesel model, base petrol model, then the hybrid here. This is a good option. Not loads of them were sold. It took a few years for the market to really warm to the idea of the hybrid. But I'm going to sort of skip past it there. I've told you a few bits about it, so you can check out the buyer's guide if you're really interested in that one. But let's jump to the V8 there, because you kind of have this point of, if you're going to have a Panamera, especially the early ones, a lot of people just went, well, I want a V8 then. Panamera S, Panamera 4S, Panamera GTS, and then you go Turbo S. Okay, so the interesting factor you'll have is, do you want a V8 naturally aspirated? Do you want a turbocharged one? Naturally aspirated ones, you're going to have, what did I make the notes of? It's 400 horsepower if you go S and 4S, and then steps up just above that, sort of like 415, 420 horsepower in the GTS model. And then when we step over to the Turbo and Turbo S, 500 and 540 brake horsepower. So this is serious power by anyone's measure. Okay, if you've got the money, if you've got the, I'd say like the maintenance kitty, probably how I'd put it. So if you've got a little bit of money off to the side, and you know owning a performance car is going to cost you quite a bit of money, I'd seriously have a look at the Turbo S. Okay, they're going to need quite a bit of maintenance. However, 500 horsepower on the road is, from a manufacturer that you can actually rely on 500 horsepower, because there's some manufacturers out there knock out 500 horsepower. 10 years down the line, you're going to be paying like similar to what the first owner was paying in their payments across the cost of a year to keep that thing on the road, because they do just start to face. Some cars just have that lineage, they just start to face about 10 years old, big bills to keep running that 500 horsepower. This, it's not one of those cars, but it is a car that needs a nice bit of maintenance off to the side, ready to go so you don't get any big shocks. If I could, I'd seriously look at the Turbo S. However, two interesting things if you go for the base V8, same for the base V6, and that is that they sold them for like 3 years with a manual gearbox. Okay, so for the drivers out there who, for whatever reason, let's say you've got a 2007 BMW M3 right now, coupe shape, and you're there and you're thinking, well, I've got kids now, and oh, I need to get something else. Oh, what shall I do? What shall I do? What shall I do? I'd really like to keep a V8, but I love a manual gearbox, blah blah blah. You can get, you have to track it down, Panamera S V8 engine manual gearbox. Okay, 6-speed manual. I didn't mention about gearboxes. The hybrid and the diesel both have an 8-speed, and then the rest of the line up to 7-speed. Okay, and for the most part, the entry V6 and this entry V8 will both have the 7-speed fitted to it. They will not have the optional 6-speed manual, unfortunately. However, those are the two that do actually have the option. So there are going to be some out there. Okay, so don't feel all is lost if you're going from something that's manual V8 and you're like, oh, Panameras are good, but yeah, I don't want that. Well, they're out there. As I've said over and over again, I always think the pick of the range for a lot of Porsche's range now is the GTS model. Okay, there are exceptions now, especially with some of the newer stuff. But a lot of the time, the GTS fills a void between top end of money, sort of the more entry models, and then the one that's you're getting a lot of the kit that comes on the top models, some suspension tweaking, and a power upgrade. Okay, so I'd say have a look at that. The V8 on this generation, so it's M52, and then it's a 0.2 and a 0.8, I believe. That may not mean anything to you, doesn't need to. The 0.00 engines, they were fitted to the Cayenne early, and they had cooling issues. You'll have to check the guide. I can't hold everything in my mind for these videos, but I will tell you on the guide. So as I say, I'll link those up. They'll be below in the comments, and I would have put a card somewhere for you to click on during the video. So if you're interested in a 970 generation and the V8 sort of tickles your fancy, check the buyer's guide out, because I'm pretty sure that this generation don't have the sort of the cooling jackets, the cooling hoses going into the hot V that were plastic that then failed. That's sort of a Cayenne issue, early Cayenne. I'm pretty sure this gets the revision, but I could be wrong, and so I'll mention it in the buyer's guide if that isn't the case. Aside from that, not the most efficient, but you're not expecting it from a V8. The trouble is, you've really got a bit of a decision on your hands here, because if we say you're looking at a 2012 Panamera Turbo, okay, 500 horsepower, what you're comparing that off to could be a ton of things, but I'll bring the BMW in for a moment, and that's the M5, twin turbocharged V8. Okay, I think Mercedes are doing the switch by this point as well. Mercedes is the E-Class with the 5.5 V8 twin turbocharged, I believe. So, and then of course you've got the RS6, which is switching at this point in its life. V10 is around till about 2010, and then we go V8. But actually, I'm trying to think. I don't think it comes out this early on. There'll be a few more years on. So it'll be like 2013 will be the first year for the RS6. It's in some really tough competition, the Panamera there. Okay, the M5, these early M5s, they do have a few reliability issues that you need to take care of. Probably look for a facelift one. If I was looking at an M5, trying to get sort of later, 2013, 14, 15 really is the year I'd be looking at the M5. The 5.5 V8 in the E-Class is glorious. I mean, really, they had to step away in this generation. You can still, for the equivalent generation, be getting the 6.2 V8, so the 63 AMG model still has the 6.2 V8 until it's facelifted, and then it goes over to the twin turbo V8. But honestly, I drove that 5.5 V8 at Mercedes World in the UK, and on track it really had something about it that I wasn't expecting. It was a wagon version as well. There's an added element going for the Mercedes. So BMW at the time, they don't put in the estate on this generation, so tough luck there. I could be wrong. No. Wagon version, you can have that, and obviously the RS6 as well. And the RS6, 4-litre V8, that makes a really good argument for itself. So it's just in really tough competition. It's only for you out there if you're saying, no, I want the Panamera. That's the one I want. I want the looks of it. I want the way it drives. Great. For everyone else, GTS is probably the pick. It's just that for GTS money, the ones I've mentioned are probably in the game. So you've got to kind of want the GTS. It's not going to be, they're a direct comparison and this hasn't got, this. There is more power coming from the German equivalent, or the other Germans out there. And of course, there are some. If you're in the US, you've got some sort of domestic competition here, which makes it even more difficult. But if the most important thing, like top of your list, is handling and the ability to carry 4 people, you have to have a drive of the Panamera. And I say, if you can drive it in GTS form, it will feel a little bit more like a driver's car. If you love to really take a car to its edge, go for the V6 base one. Just make sure you get a good one. Be a good car, yeah. And it's the cheapest to buy. So in a lot of ways, there's room if you want to then sort of move up wheel size or something like that. Maybe you could put the turbo wheels on or something along those lines. If you want to just upgrade it incrementally and enjoy it. But for everyone else, blistering pace of the turbo should see off a lot of the competition and be well worth your money. Let's move on to the 971 generation. This is the one, if you regularly watch the videos, the buyer's guide for this one just came out this week. Obviously, if you're watching this in 3 years' time from now, then that won't mean anything to you, but there is a buyer's guide for the 971 generation. So let's move on to that one, straight away. But I will just quickly mention, because I don't think I covered it. I always do. There's always one engine that I leave hanging over from the last one. On the facelift of the Panamera, about 2013, they bring in a 3-litre twin turbo into the Panamera S and the 4S. Okay, just a quick note. Okay, in case I don't think I mentioned it. So there's a V6 twin turbo engine, comes in to the range. The rest of the range stays fairly similar. A little bit incremental power boost across them. Diesel stays, so that goes all the way to the end. Hybrid stays, so they all get boosts up. I think the hybrid goes to like 420 horsepower, and even in the base model, there's a slight, I think it's like 5 horsepower more. But the Panamera S steps over to this 3-litre twin turbo engine, 400 horses. A little bit harder to find because it's coming in later in the day. The other models are still established, but what you will find is if you go for a facelift, you're going to find it hard to find the 3.6 V6. Okay, just the way the dealer network was working at the time and the customer base was working at the time, there was a clear step to why would you go for the 3.6 V6 naturally aspirated Panamera when if you step up to the S, you've got twin turbocharging, 100 horsepower more. In many ways, probably on a cruise particularly, you're going to have a more efficient engine as well. it picked off a lot of the buyers. So I just wanted to add that in. Now we can move on. 971 generation. And the interesting thing on the 971 is that I had quite a few engines to cover there. 971, we don't really do that. And 976, the one that's just come out, again, this is happening across manufacturers. We get narrower and narrower. So there are hybrids across the range on this. There's 3 hybrids on the 971. There is a diesel, but the diesel does about a year's production, roughly. So launched 2007, revealed 2016. For many of you, there won't be initial. You'll have like 2018 model years coming at the very, very end of 2017 or into 2018. The diesel engine, it's removed. I don't remember the month, but it's sort of summertime 2018. It's removed from the range. Okay, and Porsche say at the time, oh, it's a temporary. We're just taking it off the range. We're going to reevaluate the lineup and make a decision pretty quickly and a little bit quietly that they have decided there is no future for the diesel engine with them and that it's gone. So because of that, if you want a diesel in the second generation, you're going to be looking at early launch cars, 2017, first half of 2018. That's your lot. You're not going to get a diesel engine after that. The good thing, though, is that the V6 engine from before is out. And what's in is a V8 diesel with something like 420, I think it's about 418 actually, brake horsepower. So if you can get one, say produced 2016 to 2018, if you can, that is a real winner of an engine from that point of view. Now, it does have a ton of emissions equipment on it, but V8 diesel engines, especially from sort of Volkswagen Audi, it's just Volkswagen and Audi that produce them within the VW group. Oh, yeah, they generally last a very long time. I mentioned this in the guide, there's an A8 diesel. I don't think it's directly related. In fact, I'm almost sure it's not directly related. But that thing was, that engine was used in marine, so powertrains, which, if you know anything about marine powertrains, they have to run at set RPMs for very, very long periods of time. They have to be incredibly reliable. Like, really, this is why when you talk about Yamaha and the engines they've made over the time, they did the V8 and the XC90, things like that. Generally speaking, because the engineers behind those engines are used to the idea of, oh, okay, we need to make an engine that's going to run for 6 hours at this RPM, right? How reliable do we have to make that? Right, yeah, that's going to be really challenging, blah, blah, blah. When you bring that mindset into car manufacturing, which doesn't usually have the revs, it doesn't have the torque demand because it's not trying to move water out of its way to propel a much, much heavier object, you don't need the high tolerance that marine engines need. So it's a little bit of an aside because it's not that engine that's in the V8 Panamera diesel, but it just shows you a little bit of the technology that's coming through, a little bit of the mindset behind that engine. So, if you are after a diesel one, that's something to bear in mind. Now, the 3 litre, 2.9 litre, and 4 litre. Those are your options. If we stick with the 3 litre for a moment, it's twin turbocharged. It does come in a hybrid form. It's just the Panamera e-hybrid if it's a base, the 3 litre hybrid, because then you also have the Turbo S hybrid, and if I'm remembering correctly, there's a S hybrid, 4S hybrid, I believe. So the most basic form for the 3 litre is like 365 horsepower. That's Panamera 4. That's where you start out with the 3 litre. You move on to the hybrid. 400, I had to make a note of this, 462 horsepower combined. You've got the electric, and I think it's about 30 miles range on that one as well. Then you move up to the 4S. 4S sticks with that same. Let me double check I'm right. No, it doesn't. So 4S then switches to the 2.9. So let's do it this way. 3 litre, you've got Panamera, Panamera 4, and then Panamera e-hybrid. Okay. The 3 litre engine, generally very reliable, used by Audi a lot of the time. When it's pushed, does have a few issues, and early ones, rocker arm, I mentioned this in the guide, is something to be aware of. if we look at it for the equivalent Audi, it's like the S engine. Then we have the 2.9 engine, 2.9 V6 twin turbo, single turbo, twin turbo. Now, before I move on to the 2.9, this 3 litre, it's around, for some countries, it'll be around all the way through, ending around 2021. Others, the engine gets replaced with the 2.9. I tried to get sort of a list of countries to make it really easy, but it's just not easy. So the way I'll put it is, I think you have North America, the Aussies, New Zealanders, Europe, you'll have this 3 litre from 2016 to 2020. Okay, that's general. Canadians as well. Sorry for forgetting you. Aside from that, you'll have the switch to the 2.9. For some world markets, there is a delay. And of course, the delay is expected, and you know why. The world changes in 2020. And so, supply lines are a bit affected for some countries, worse than others. Okay, so let's move on to talking about the 2.9, because the 2.9 is going to end up in pretty much everything eventually in this generation. But initially, it's what's going in the 4S model. So when you have 4S, 435 horsepower. Okay. The way I look at the 2.9 engine, without any assistance on it, not hybrid or anything like that, it's probably the one that if you're in this generation and you're looking to keep something long term, okay, so you don't know what's going to happen with the car market, because none of us do. We could be forced to go to EV tomorrow. We may never ever happen, and we go on to an alternative fuel or something else. Who knows at this point? This would be the one I'd probably want to sit in. Okay, it's just that balance of power, fuel efficiency, longevity. So you've got sort of the 3 prongs that most people are really looking for within a car. It's still being put into the newest models. Okay, so the idea of part supply, it's not really a concern when it comes to Porsche models anyway. However, if they're still making it, they're likely to continue refining it. And you may find that you go for a service at your specialist one day and they say, oh, you've got, part number this. They did a revision to part number this, and it's much more reliable. Do you want to make the change? And it's going to cost X, Y, Z. And you think, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'll do that. Quite common that you'll get that when engines run for quite long periods of time. And the older engines, obviously you can't do everything, because they might make massive internal changes, but they might make minor revisions, and you can sort of piggyback on the back of that and keep a car for much longer with these reliability or power revisions as you go forward. So that's one aspect over here. Secondly, actually, compared to the rest of the lineup, this is a pretty efficient engine. Okay, it's not as efficient as a hybrid, not as powerful as a hybrid, not as powerful as the V8, but where it sits on the road, 430 horsepower, unless we all start driving around in Taycans tomorrow, and Taycan turbos, 430 horsepower will never feel slow. And I say that, even if we were all driving around Taycan turbos, speed limits are, if anything, for most countries, going down. Like 30 zones becoming 20 zones and all this sort of stuff. So your ability to use high horsepower, sort of 700 horsepower on the road, is being ever squeezed, and 400 horsepower will still feel lightning on the road, even a car of this weight, this size, because the engineering behind it, bearing in mind we've stepped into all air suspension on this generation, the engineering behind it adds agility. Okay, from there, let's talk about the V8s, because we're going to get revised engines halfway through here as well. So let's talk about the V8s quickly, and then I'll talk about the facelift model. You've got the V8 is in the GTS, 464 brake horsepower. I made a quick note for the turbo, 541 brake horsepower in the turbo. And then the Turbo SE Hybrid gets that same engine out of the turbo, adds electric motors to it, gives a combined about 670 horsepower. So just off into the stratosphere of power at this point. By the way, all of the hybrids are roughly around 30 miles of range or 50 kilometers of range. Okay, just an FYI on the side there. Now, these are the ultimate versions for this pre-facelift, so running up to about 2020, 2021. However, the GTS is pretty late in the game, and it's put into the market, and then Porsche pull it out of the market after about a year to 18 months. So I think we're going to be talking about it more in the facelift. So because of that, I'll just talk about the turbo for now. neither one of these is a particularly big seller, okay? Because I think the trouble is the entry of the range has become so capable, and from a price point of view, so competitive with things that are priced a little bit higher than it. Obviously, once you add options on, game over, different conversation entirely. But at the base level, the 2.9 and the 3 litre V6 actually start competing with stuff from other manufacturers that is either downsizing to V6 or is still in a V8 form. Once you step up into the V8 turbos, when they were new, they were pricey, okay? And because of that, I think you're still going to face a price challenge on these. Is that to say that you're not getting your money's worth? No, not at all. I'm a fan of the GTS. I think if I wanted a V8, I'd just go and get a GTS model. Stepping up for the extra, will be 80 horsepower into the turbo, and then 200 horsepower more in the e-hybrid. If you're going to get a benefit of having a hybrid model, then yes, you probably could justify some of the additional cost going into a hybrid from, say, a GTS, and the power. Who doesn't like extra power? Although once you're stepping up to this sort of horsepower, particularly in this type of car, I'm not sure quite how you're going to enjoy it, because if your passengers are not up for you launching a car to 0 to 62, I think it's 3.2 seconds in this, or 3.3 seconds. You've got to have passengers well up for that. And if you've got a couple of 5-year-olds in the back, yeah, they might say they'd enjoy it and then be sick on the back seat. Not as enjoyable when you're washing that out later on in the day. So something to bear in mind there. Now, V8 reliability, these 4 litres, pretty. There is a buyer's guide for it, but from what I could see, all 3 of these engines on the Panamera, they didn't cause mass reliability worries. Okay, of course, there's stories left and right of minor issues, things that needed to get revised, part issues, stuff like that. But there isn't, some catastrophic issue that really sort of rises up on these. And it's why, if you're one of those people you're like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get another V8, okay, because everything's being downsized, the world is changing, blah, 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 then this probably is that opportunity, okay, to get yourself into either V8 hybrid and have the hybrid range, be able to enjoy that and use it to save a little bit of money on fuel if possible, if you've got, say, an electricity tariff that's going to allow you to do that, or just go and enjoy a V8 while you can. Go for a turbo, go for a GTS. Me, I'd probably just look at a GTS. I think, I said earlier, 100 horsepower, you'll notice it. Yeah, you will 300 to 400 horsepower, and you will 400 to 500. It's just, 450 to 550. It's just, we're moving up into this sort of shaving off 0.3, 0.4 of a second, 0.5 of a second, when you're already going at this sort of speeds. And bearing in mind, most of your driving is going to be 25 miles per hour to 70, 80 miles per hour. So for metric world, 40 kilometers to 140 kilometers. That's really the range that most people ever use a car within. Yeah, you're going to be a bit faster in the turbo, but you're never going to be probably stretching the legs enough, wrapping the speedo around to really notice that bigger horsepower. Maybe you are, and if you are, then go for a turbo. Otherwise, the GTS kind of does everything. The hybrid, I wouldn't concentrate so much on what it does power-wise as the fact that you can have huge power and much higher fuel efficiency, because of course that hybrid system isn't just going to do 30 miles and switch off. It's going to fill in all the gaps where the car is least efficient. So that's something to bear in mind on that one. Now, moving over to the facelift, sorry. If you can't live without 500 horsepower, the 4S hybrid model comes in here. And this 4S hybrid, I made a quick note, 4SE hybrid, 500, and 52 brake horsepower. So if you're like, well, I just want power. I don't care what the engine sounds like. I don't care what engine's in it. It's just, as long as it's an engine and I want hybrid assistance, 550 horsepower. Can't say fairer than that, can you? I mean, you can go for the Turbo S hybrid, where you're going up to then 700 PS, so 690 horsepower, that'll be 680 horsepower. We're just going into the silly figures at this point, and there's nothing wrong with that It's just, if you've launched a car on a track or on a runway or something like that, 700 horsepower feels amazing. When you then drive off that track onto a regular road, it just feels like a complete waste. I'm not. I don't want to be critical of it, because of course there are sometimes areas where you can open up the power feed, but it's just, you go onto a track, you can use it all the time. You know, you can use it on a runway all the time, and then you may have experienced this. You know, then you come off and you go back onto the road and you go, you know, you just accelerate it up to the speed limit and then go, yeah. You know, maybe you're in an area where there's no one around and you push it a little bit, but for the most part, you're driving quite sedately. You do your overtakes and everything else, but 500 horsepower, 600 horsepower, 700 horsepower, 800 horsepower, 900 horsepower. Really, you know, this is why I said at the original point, right back on the 970 generation, the 3.6 V6, you will be driving that, you will be pedaling it. It will not be as fast as people have got used to on Panameras and 911s and everything else. You put your foot for it and you've got to now be in it. You've got to be in the right gear and you've got to get going. These, they're very forgiving. You know, you put your foot down, it will shuffle the gearbox, you'll be gone. You know, there might be a delay of 0.2, 0.3 of a second just for it to get the right gear and get you in the right rev range, and then you'll go. And then you're gone. You know, you're just off into the stratosphere. Hopefully without anyone holding a camera near you, because, you know, you're getting in a bit of trouble. Facelift for the Panamera and Panamera 4. It puts the 2.9 engine in, 325 horsepower, efficient from the point of view of, you know, you don't have a diesel anymore. And I think really this is where this conversation shifts over to. Yes, there's big power. The GTS and the Turbo are still out there, although they called, I think the Turbo's gone. They've just used the Turbo S nameplate. What did I write for that? 500. So 475 and 621 horsepower. So no hybrid assistance. Still blistering quick on both of them. The e-hybrid, because that's 550 horsepower, you've got the smaller engine. You can do some mileage, you know, just running around on the battery. Maybe a good compromise for other people. For those of you that just hear all these high horsepower numbers and think, well, I'd rather get, you know, 30 miles to the gallon and be able to cruise around and just have something nice to look at. And when I want to open it up, be able to hold my foot to the floor for more than 1.5 seconds. Panamera and Panamera 4. And in many ways, a Panamera 4, because you'll have all-wheel drive, so it doesn't matter the weather conditions, you will be able to use it. It's not a Range Rover, but you will be able to use it. It will be that bit more capable. And with 325 horsepower, with that weight on it, you will actually need to push the power a little bit if you want to have something, a bit of a performance drive. That brings us in the end of the 971. I know I rushed through the facelifts a little bit there. Sorry for that. It's just that I make these videos way too long a lot of the time. So we're going to rush through those a little bit, because I think looking at the used market particularly, what happened was 2021. So, you know, we all know what happened in 2020, and then 2021, you've got the Taycan coming out, and you see this sort of handover where people may have previously been able to get company leases or whatever it was on their new Panamera. There was a tax incentive to go for the Taycan, and that's where the market moved over to. Okay. Because of that, on the used market, there just isn't the supply. 2022, 2023, and the last sort of out in 2024 cars that there are, sort of 2017 up to 2020, 2021. So just something to bear in mind on the used market. Now we'll step in, we'll do very quickly, we'll do the brand new generation at 976. And because this is still a very new car, they've released sort of two models essentially, well, three: Panamera, Panamera 4, Panamera Turbo e-hybrid. 350 horsepower if you go for a Panamera or Panamera 4 from the 2.9 V6. That is for me the one that you'd go for. However, I completely get, especially because if you're out there and you're saying, well, I need some hybrid range, you know, maybe it's a emissions thing, because we know due to how the world testing happens for hybrids, you can get a hybrid model that is a lot lower on tax. So if that is an element, but you don't want to go Taycan, there's a 670 horsepower hybrid for you to choose. And because I think the market is shifting a little bit. It's not negative EV, but we're just seeing this point where people are questioning EVs, especially because of the depreciation. 670 horsepower with a V8 and with a hybrid system. It's not actually probably where we thought we would be talking in 2025. Because of Euro 7 emissions about to come in for Europe, we probably thought we'd be talking about really downsized engines, maybe even the 4-cylinder coming in from the VW group and matching up with a hybrid. And it's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a V8 with nearly 700 horsepower and hybrid range. So it's a good world to be in at the moment, isn't it? That's it though. I'm not going to go too far into the new generation. It's not really had enough coverage. I haven't driven it yet, so I can't give you any ideas on it. But interesting car, a lot more Taycan inspired. You can see that chassis sharing going on a lot more, and clearly they wanted to make it so buyers can say, that's the EV, that's the hybrid, don't look too different, makes the choice a little bit easier. And they've kind of locked on for the right look, I think, with the Taycan. They really nailed the looks department on that one, bringing the Panamera more in that sort of lineup rather than trying to do the stretch 911 look. Obviously, that's attracted buyers. So, yeah, something to mind you. Then again, the Taycan does have a little bit of a stretched 911 look about it. So, yeah, there we go. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Thank you for sticking all the way to the end of it. If you've enjoyed it, and I always forget to say this during the video, consider subscribing, consider liking, and consider joining. There's channel memberships out there now. You can join, become a channel member, and that sort of supports the channel. I put some quizzes and stuff up on the back end that you can see. And in time, as time becomes available, I'm going to be adding sort of videos just for members as well. So something to bear in mind. Otherwise, have a great day, and I shall see you in the next one.